Please join in singing hymn 1051 in the Teal hymnal, We Are, hymn 1051.
For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe, who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe, who we are. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great vision. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. We are mothers of courage and fathers of time. We are daughters of dust and the sons of great visions. We're sisters of mercy and brothers of love. We are lovers of life and the builders of nations. We're seekers of truth and keepers of faith. We are makers of peace and the wisdom of ages. We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreamings. We are the breath of our ancestors. We are the Spirit of God. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe, who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe, who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe, who we are. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe, who we are.
Good morning. Our opening words this morning are by Wivma Rahman, entitled, It is That Time and That Place. Now is the time to call on the memories of the ancestors who thought that they could not walk another step towards freedom, and yet they did. It is that time and the place to call on the memories of the ancestors who, when the darkness of their lives threatened to take away the hope and the light, reached a little deeper and prayed another prayer. It is that time and that place to remember those who came through the long night to witness another sunrise. It is that time and that place to remember the oceans of tears shed to deliver us to this time, to remember the bent knees and bowed backs, to remember the fervent voices asking, begging, and beseeching for loved ones sold off. Time to remember their laughter and joy, though they had far less, and little reason for optimism, and yet they stayed on the path towards a better day. Time to hold on to the steadfast hearts and hands and prayers of the ancestors that have brought us this far. Time to make them proud and to show them and ourselves what we are made of. Time to show them that their prayers and their sacrifices and their lives were not in vain and did not go unnoticed, nor have they been forgotten. Did you not know that this day would come? Did you not know that we would have to change places? Did you not know that just as our ancestors were delivered, we too will be delivered? It is that time and that place. We are the ones we have been waiting for. For that, let us be eternally grateful. Amen, and blessed be. I light this chalice to remind us of the light of this community, of the love that holds us all, and of our deep interconnectedness. I invite you to join me in the recitation of our shared covenant. Love is the spirit of this congregation, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another.
Good morning, dearly beloveds. This subject, Samhain, or the more familiar Halloween, is very personal to me. On a nature-based wheel of life, it is the final fall harvest celebration before winter. So after my own travels from birth, spring, summer, and then fall, it now represents the autumn of my life. First, let me introduce myself. I'm a 95-year-old, 7th generation Unitarian Universalist who has served over the years on various committees and a board member of 5 different UU churches and board chair of one of those. My personal spirituality is based upon earth-centered, nature-based beliefs, seeing the entire world as interconnected, a living entity, recognizing the value and the sacredness of the spirit of life on all levels. So I identify as a pagan, honoring the Great Spirit and the sense that nature is the basic system of life, and that while we may dream, make up labels, and perform rituals, the power resides in the overall ecosystem, trying to maintain balance, that the contributions of any one be to the good of the all. Back in the 1900s, I was a founding member of the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, CUPS, the chapter in the Unitarian Church in New Bedford. We held compelling rituals honoring both the moon and the sun cycles. Later, I continued my group practice with the women's group at the Westminster Church. But now, my observations and connections are more private in nature. But before I can get to my own connection to the circle of the seasons, or more broadly, the wheel of life, and the place on this wheel that we now call Samhain, I need to get back to the beginning. Archaeologists and anthropologists continue to explore and determine the evidence of cultural rituals suggestive of the spiritual practices and beliefs of pre-literate peoples. Indications of any sort of religious practice. Did they leave any evidence of practices relating to the unexplained or imaginary powers? Actual sites and artifacts related to ritual practices are being identified. They support the long history of oral tradition and the lasting mythologies that attest to their, in quotes, religious practices. So there is evidence that interior, thought-based meaning was expressed through symbolic exercises and practices, dancing and music. These have been passed down over the centuries, possibly right back to what we think of as the beginning 30,000 years ago for the peoples that are being studied. Examples have been found throughout the world, often seen as piles or circles of stone, carved figures, even bone and mineral ritual objects, mounds of earth, and especially sites where the sun lines up along identical lines every summer solstice. Samhain is not the only ceremony for those who have passed that is held on this October 31st to November 1st timeframe. Mexico and China have similar but unrelated ceremonies to honor their dead. However, most of us are more familiar with the examples from the British Isles, as the Celts incorporated the oral traditions and continuing practices of the Picts or Pixies, which were then further developed from the old religion into the Druidic mysteries. Although their practices, along with many other early and still honored worship and belief systems, with even many named gods and goddesses, there still was this sun calendar, the basis for the understanding of the passage of our lives, our needs and hopes and fears. Even now, our city-based, industrialized lifestyles relies on the seasonal bounty of nature for the basics of food, shelter, medicine, and clean air and water. So before we modern people, there were hunter-gatherers. And later, the more settled agriculturally based groups. Life for them was entirely of necessity, based upon the cycles of the seasons that determined both vegetative and animal food sources. They followed a sun-based calendar based upon the understanding of these approximate dates. Picture, if you will, a wheel. At the top is December 21st, the longest and darkest night, the winter solstice. At the bottom is June 21st, the longest and brightest day, the summer solstice. Then in the opposite sides of the wheel, the equinoxes, March 21st and spring and September 21st of fall. These are the 2 days of equal darkness and light. However, early cultures also identified the so-called cross quarters. Now, at last, we get to Samhain. So picture the 8 spokes of the wheel with a cross quarter falling between each of the others. So as you pass from fall into winter, there's a transitional period, a time of celebration that is called Samhain, cognate perhaps with a later title, Samhain, the Lord of Death, but that was later. It is really named after the Celtic Druid festival, a time when the veil of life between the worlds is thinnest. It is the time to speak to and honor the beloveds, our ancestors or friends who have passed into the great beyond. As in all such pagan gatherings, it is a celebration, a feast. They did know how to have a good time. In addition, candy was given out to all, especially the youngsters, as a way of ensuring a safe passage back and forth between the worlds, and to propitiate the tricksters or the evil spirits of those Picts and the Pixies. Even today, the youngsters go trick-or-treating, and we still pass around the pomegranate seeds of life, and we bob for the apples of divination. As our ancestors were completing the journey around the wheel, from the hope of spring planting, the richness of summer growth, the largesse of fall harvest, then they faced the cold and dark and the life-threatening period of winter. They reflected upon the past year, thought of their ancestors and those that have recently left them, a time of reflection and a wish to bring past and future together for a few magical hours. It was a time to prepare for perhaps final endings, as well as hopeful futures. And yes, for me, this is personal. Are we all pagans? Paganus, people of the country, or heathens, people of the heath? Some of us are still living with one foot and part of our brains in that world of back to nature reality. Count me in. As we travel on our daily round, may we meet often and share many important celebrations, as we make our way around the wheel of life. Ahoy, singing turtle, Essjay.
It's that time of year. For a few weeks now, I've been watching our previously beautiful garden wane from its summer beauty to a more fall-like quieting, as this season, of course, merits. A pattern that's completely predictable, the once sumptuous garden that was filled with tomatoes and eggplants and basil, cucumbers, green beans, and more. It's the right time for it to begin to let go of what was and ease into a different time in its existence. I do still check on it most days, though, searching for late cherry tomatoes, for one or two more jalapenos, or maybe a sprig of parsley or thyme before the plants fully shift into winter mode. This year, more than most, I admit it, I'm dragging my feet in acknowledging the end to the garden's bounty. Despite the bright colors of the fall leaves, the beautiful orange pumpkins, the brightly colored gourds, I'm very slow this year to acknowledge the season's shift. And I know I'm not alone in this. In late October, around the world, observances abound to help us humans make just such a shift, acknowledging the transition of one season, of one time of life into the next. And each faith tradition, in its own way, offers rituals to make sense of, to become more comfortable with, and to provide access to the truths of this season. To name but just a few, observances of this time of year include Samhain, Day of the Dead, All Hallows Eve, and Halloween. And there's much to do and much to learn in this liminal space when we recognize finally that summer is over, the crops need to come in, whatever's left, and preparation for survival through winter must begin in earnest. And this is the basis in some manner for early Samhain observances. It happened, and it happens in the Celtic world, what we now think of as Ireland, but that was the basis for the holiday, although it's celebrated worldwide now. These colder nights that we're experiencing, they tell us to bring in the final crops, to slaughter the animals before true winter sets in. Now, part of this celebration at the same time was a concurrent recognition of those who we had lost and how the seasons of their lives too had ended. So in the midst of all this preparation for winter, it was common to stop and be present for one's ancestors. Because it was believed, and it's still believed by many, that during this time there's a thinning of the veil between this world and the next, however you understand that. That there's an offer of an incredible opportunity to visit with, to learn from, and even make peace with those whose spirits have long since left their physical form. And so this season and the rituals of this season, the gifts of this moment, they all lead in the exact same direction toward acknowledging the larger arc of life. And I'm grateful that Essjay provided the reflection she did today, because she can talk to Samhain in particular in a way that I cannot. But I've been reading about it all the same, trying to understand its power, why it's endured over millennia, and its relationship to All Hallows Eve and Halloween. And the best I understand it, All Hallows Eve is the Christianization, the appropriation of, if you will, of that ancient Celtic tradition. Halloween takes that a step further and Americanizes and commercializes that observance. But they all matter. Because as far as Halloween might be from its very vague roots in a long and important pagan tradition, there's some real truth that this holiday still allows us to acknowledge. We get to see, act out, and get comfortable with death, whether it's by dressing up as monsters and vampires, or the telling of scary Halloween stories, or wandering through human-made Halloween houses. And the truth is that we do it now for the same reason it's always been done, because we want to be reminded even if in startling ways, that we're still here, still very much alive. We dip into the realm of the dead, whether by costume or by spiritual practice, to feel the presence of the departed, but also to affirm our own living state. And in this time of so much uncertainty and anxiety, there is most certainly wisdom to be gained from our ancestors about the survival of strife. I keep thinking about the Day of the Dead as well, common in much of the Southern Hemisphere, and it offers rich resonance with these themes of ancestry, death, and shift. I am only not speaking at length on this holiday because it's not part of my tradition, and I leave that conversation, that explanation to someone for whom that is part of their tradition. But what I want to say now is that this idea, it isn't singular to any one faith, because we all need ways to honor and perhaps even feel access to those that came before us. And in these times, I think that there's maybe one more message a little deeper down. And it's the one that I'm holding on to right now. And maybe you are too. Today, then, we thank our ancestors. We thank them for the generations that led to our births, for sustaining us through childhood, through challenge, through loss. We thank them for teaching us resistance and endurance. We thank them for imbuing us with the desire to work for something larger than ourselves alone. So wherever you are right now, I invite you to honor them. Maybe close your eyes, take a breath, bring forward the image of someone you've loved and had to say goodbye to. If you're lucky enough to never have had a loss, maybe bring forward one of the many lost to COVID, even if a complete stranger, into your mind's eye, into your heart. Thank them for what their lives meant to this world. All that brought us to this day, right here, right now. And sit with that gratitude. And when you're ready, take that gratitude and turn it inward toward yourself. Thank your own reserves, your own tenacity, your patience, your passion. Feel the blood rushing through your veins, your feet firmly on the ground, and feel the joy of living to be part of this day. This is the generation, beloveds. This is the time that your very being must be put to use in building the world we dream of. You who are here will one day be ancestors. And your legacy will be unmistakable. For you will have survived a pandemic, fought for equality, and loved fiercely. From my heart to yours, with endless gratitude, I pray that we continue the good fight and make our ancestors proud of what they created in us. Blessed be.
Please join the choir in singing hymn 107, Now Sing We of the Brave of Old. Hymn 107.
Now sing we of the brave of old, who would not sell themselves for gold.
close with the words of Joy Harjo, poet laureate, in the words of her poem entitled, "For Calling Back the Spirit from Wandering the Earth in Its Human Feet." And I chose this poem because it feels like the best advice imaginable on this day for guidance in the words of the late, great Mary Oliver, another poet, on how to live this one precious life. So here's what poet Joy Harjo says. Put down that bag of potato chips, that white bread, that bottle of pop. Turn off that cell phone, computer, and remote control. Open the door and then close it behind you. Take a breath offered by the friendly winds. They travel to the earth, gathering essences of plants to clean. Give back with gratitude. Acknowledge this earth that has cared for you since you were a dream, planting itself within your parents' desire. Let your feet take you to the encampment of the guardians who have known you before time, who will be there after time. They sit before the fire that has been there without time. Let the earth stabilize your post-colonial insecure jitters. Be respectful of the small insects, birds, and animal people who accompany you. Ask their forgiveness for the harm we humans have caused upon them. Don't worry. The heart knows the way. There may be high-rises, interstate checkpoints, armed soldiers, massacres, wars, and those who will despise you because they despise themselves. The journey might take you a few hours, a day, a year, a few years, 100 years, 1,000 or even more. Watch your mind. Without training, it might run away and leave your heart for the immense human feast set by the thieves of time. When you find your way to the circle, to the fire kept burning by the keepers of the soul, you will be welcome. Cut the ties you have to failure and shame. Let the pain you're holding in your mind, your shoulders, your heart, all the way to your feet, let it go. Let go the pain of your ancestors to make way for those who are heading in our direction. Ask for forgiveness. Call upon the help of those who love you. These helpers take many forms: animal, element, bird, angel, saint, stone, or ancestor. Call yourself back. You'll find yourself caught in corners and creases of shame, judgment, and human abuse. And you must call yourself in a way that your spirit will want to return. Speak to it as though it were a beloved child. Welcome back your spirit from its wandering. It will return in pieces, in tatters. Gather them together. They will be happy to be found after being lost for so long. Your spirit will need to sleep for a while after it is bathed and given clean clothes. And now you can have a party. Invite everyone you know who loves and supports you. Keep some extra space for those who have nowhere else to go. Make a giveaway, and remember, keep the speeches short. And then you must do this. Help the next person find their way through the dark. Please join me in our closing song.
the flame of peace and love until we meet again. Carry the flame of peace and love until we meet again. Carry the flame of peace and love until